In other news, Yemen's warring sides are set to meet in Geneva for UN-sponsored talks on a prisoner release tomorrow. The negotiations to release some 1,400 prisoners was due to take place today, but was delayed. Now, this comes as fighting flares in the center of the country between Houthi rebels and government-backed forces. For more, we can bring in France 24's Nadia Masi from our International Affairs desk. Nadia, what do we know about what's happening in the central region of Yemen where this fighting is taking place?
The honest answer is we don't know very much. It is really hard to get journalists into Yemen. It is really hard to get credible information out. But what we've been able to verify is that there's been an alarming rise of violence in the center of Yemen, in a region called Marib. This is in the very center of the country, one of the few areas that's been under government control for many years now. You can see it on the map here. There's Marib just there. As you can see, it's largely in an area that had been controlled by the government for a long time. But since the beginning of this year, the Houthi forces, the rebel forces that control the capital Sana'a, have been trying to push through to take Marib. And in the past couple of weeks, we've seen a real spike in fighting. The UN warning that the highest death toll in Yemen this year was in August, much of that in Marib. And it's a particularly important area because this is where somewhere between 1 and 2 million people who've been displaced from the conflict elsewhere in Yemen have gone to in the past couple of years. And the United Nations has been warning this week that those people may be displaced again if that fighting continues. And we sort of, we have a sense of why the Houthis want to try and take Marib now, because they've held the capital, Sana'a, for some time. And this area, Marib, is strategically rich in oil and gas. So this is an area that would be really key for them strategically should they be able to take it. But as I say, we can see that the fighting is getting much worse. Our France 24's Arabic correspondent in the capital saying that in the past 48 hours there's been a surge in fighting. They believe some 50 people have been killed. And an NGO worker I was speaking to myself earlier today said that they knew that there was gunfire ringing out today in Marib. Now, you mentioned those UN-sponsored talks in Geneva that are supposed to take place tomorrow. And the UN has been very clear that this latest fighting in Marib is only going to make it much harder to find a meaningful ceasefire in Yemen, making it harder for those talks to really make any progress.
Every time the UN comes out with a report on the situation in Yemen, we are reminded that this is, the world's worst humanitarian crisis that has been caused from this conflict. Why then do we not seem to care or be able to find a resolution to put an end to this conflict, the suffering of the people in what is one of the world's poorest countries?
Absolutely. I think Yemen is sometimes called the forgotten war, and there are, I think, a few reasons for that. As I mentioned, it is hard to get into Yemen. It's hard for journalists to get on the ground and tell us what's happening. And I think, you can make a comparison actually between the situation in Yemen in the past couple of years and Syria, because when the war in Syria was kind of at its height back in 2015, even if you weren't a big follower of international news, you knew there was a crisis in Syria, you knew there was a war, you knew people were suffering. The same kind of knowledge doesn't really exist for Yemen, and I think there are a few reasons for that. One is that Yemen is, even before the war, the poorest country in the Arab world. That means there are not many people who speak really good English, who are sort of media activists, who can make these campaigns showing the suffering of people inside Yemen in the way that you did very compellingly with Syria. And the other thing is the geography of Yemen. It's isolated. It's very hard for people from Yemen to get out of the country. They kind of have to get through Saudi Arabia, which is effectively impossible, to get to Europe in the way that so many Syrians did back in 2015, kind of literally bringing the crisis to the shores of Europe. We never saw that with Yemen. I think that's meant that for many people, the crisis in Yemen has been out of sight, out of mind. But as you said, let's not forget, this is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. The Saudi-led campaign that began in 2015 was only supposed to last a few weeks. It's still going on 5 years later, and there's virtual stalemate. That bombing campaign in Yemen continues. We know France, the UK, the United States all still sell weapons to the Saudi government, many people arguing that that makes them complicit in the suffering of people in Yemen. And now we have, for the second time, the spectre of famine in Yemen as well. The UN saying that it needs far more money to try and feed people in the country. And of course, now we have COVID-19 as well, taking its toll on a population that's already suffering hugely. And I just think that this latest battle for Marib, that place in the centre of the country that I highlighted, really highlights that after 6 years of war, 5 years of foreign intervention, the war in Yemen certainly isn't over yet.
We'll see what happens from those talks tomorrow in Geneva. Thank you very much for that, Nadia Massi there.